Good morning. It is 11 a.m., January 30th, and this is SJ with Commission Shift, joining our space discussion to go over some of the things that just happened in the Railroad Commission monthly open meeting. So this is a practice every month that we have here at Commission Shift to highlight, slow down, and discuss some of the agenda items that happen in these monthly meetings that are held by our state oil and gas agency. So Commission Shift's mission is to build public support to hold our oil and gas agency accountable to its mission. And part of that is trying to fight for more transparency at the Railroad Commission and support things that increase engagement with members of the public with this agency that is so important and affects all of us. So I'm joined today with some staff members, and I'm really excited to get some of their perspectives on what happened in the meeting today. As people who are listening may know already, the Railroad Commission open meetings are sort of run like auctions. They have over 700 items this time around, and that's pretty typical, and they go fast through those items. So we're going to pull out some and talk about them. And we're definitely going to save some time to talk about the public input section of the meeting and what happened with item 709, which is the challenge to the federal methane rule. So we'll talk about all of that, but I'm joined with our policy manager, Paige Powell, our field manager, our field organizer, Alyssa Wallace, and some of our other staff might be listening in too or asking questions along the way. So I'll just open up this discussion. We'll try to stick to the order of the agenda as best we can. So I earmarked for us agenda item 9. This had to do with a permit of a waste disposal facility and its proximity to a residence. So maybe we can talk about that agenda item. Paige, were you listening for agenda item 9? Make sure that Paige is there. Can you hear us, Paige?
Hey, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, gotcha.
Great. So go ahead. I think I missed the
ahead.
part you were introducing a waste disposal facility.
Yeah, so I'm starting at the top of the agenda of a very long agenda, but item 9 was about a permit for what looks like a waste disposal site near a residence. Were you following that agenda item? If not, that was what I can tell about it is that this was a waste disposal that was near a Baptist summer camp. This is the one, but it has year-round occupants, and the disposal site is going to be run by a company that, by the public testimony that we heard, already has a bad track record of problems and violations, which I learned about from the input of, I think, the county commissioner who spoke on this agenda item. He made comments that the company started laying pipes before securing permits and that they were repeated offenders. So that was concerning. I thought he made really great remarks. And he even kind of spoke to like gaps in oversight when it comes to waste disposal wells. He mentioned that there would be air pollution from this site, but the Railroad Commission should step in anyway. Can you kind of talk about maybe the gap, Paige, in oversight, what he was referring to with like air pollution versus the facility itself? We may have some tech issues. Hold on one sec.
Oh, here. Can you hear me now? Is that better?
I can hear you.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Um, yeah, I remember his testimony. It was really fantastic, and he spoke to just the heartland values of a Baptist summer camp and children that might be exposed to hydrogen sulfide cloud during their, you know, essentially their summer retreat. Um, but his to your point, he made a comment about H2S and benzene, two of the air pollutants that are often found in wastewater, oil and gas wastewater, and are emitted from different storage containers or pits, or possibly injection wells if they were to blow out. And the thing about Railroad Commission's authority in this situation is that they have authority and jurisdiction over the H2S and the hydrogen sulfide, but not the benzene, because that's under the purview of the TCEQ, of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So what one of the commissioners said is that they would make sure that the wastewater and the waste being disposed of at this site did not contain any H2S. He didn't say other things about off-gassing benzene from oil or gas or whatever. And I thought it was interesting. They also made a comment that as a good neighbor, the wastewater disposal company should consider moving their open pits or any sort of waste pits as far as possible away from the property line, so that the kids could have a better chance with the emissions, essentially. And later, when our executive director, Virginia Palacios, gave her testimony during the open comment section, she mentioned how disappointing this ruling was, because the commissioners do have the authority to request amendments for these permit applications and authorize certain restrictions on placement due to public health hazards. That's exactly what we were seeing here, is the commission refusing to step into their full power to keep these two businesses operating as safely as possible.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out that part, because I did a double take when I was listening, when the commissioners basically just sort of said, and we're asking if they would just please consider, pretty please, if they might want to move the facility 100 feet further away. Like, if they just want to think about that. And they're like, yeah, it sounded so passive. And I just was sort of in disbelief that these are the three leaders of our oversight agency, and they're framing it in this sort of optional, up to you if you would like kind of language.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really feels to me just sort of indicative of the ongoing, I guess I want to say, favorability towards the industry, the laissez-faire, the hands-off, that like we're going to give you as few regulations as possible. We're going to allow this wastewater disposal to operate next to a children's camp, but we're not going to tell you, where you put it. We're just asking that, you be a good neighbor. It's at your discretion, wastewater disposal company, not that we're the regulators. Like, it's just, it's laughable. I have to say it's laughable, because I'm completely appalled. Like, as somebody who loves good government and understands the need for like reasonable environmental policy, it makes me really mad that they wouldn't just write in a common sense public health clause into this, like place it as far away as possible from any other humans, so that there are no adverse health impacts.
I'm wondering, Paige, can you kind of frame for us some of the bigger issues at stake with these waste water disposal facilities and wastewater in general, and like what's happening in West Texas? I know you're someone who's researched and thought a lot about our water sources. So can you explain, what is at stake with items like this? I mean, there was also, I think, items 22 and 23 in the agenda were also covering wastewater disposal permits. Can you kind of give us an overview on what's at stake?
Yeah, absolutely. This wastewater thing has been a new little research rabbit hole that I've kind of fell into the last couple of months as I've been, working in carbon capture and storage. So when you do enhanced oil recovery and you pump, you either do a water flood or a CO2 flood on the well, you're putting fluids and stuff into the ground, right? CO2 in particular, like is going to move things around, and so it gets stuff pumping, it gets stuff moving out of the well. Like that's why they do enhanced oil recovery. So when the extra bits of oil and gas are produced through EOR, there's a ton, like 6 to 10 to multiple times the volume of wastewater produced at the same time. And so then the question is, what do you do with this wastewater? Do you just like put it in a pit and let it evaporate and hope that it works out? Do you inject it underground, which is what they've been doing? So that's like the favored method, is the in underground injection of wastewater. And there's so much produced water because of the expansion of fracking over the last 20 years, that we're seeing induced seismicity, right? We're seeing man-made earthquakes from all of this wastewater injection. We're seeing sinkholes and geysers. There's this well blowout, and today in the commission or in the open meeting, they called it a ghost well blowout because they never heard of the well, wasn't on any documents anywhere ever, but it blew out. It started blowing out about 6 weeks ago in early December. And it took them until last week to plug the well, with people working overnight, with lights and like trying to stop it from flowing, dispose of like this toxic salty water that's just flowing over and over. So that's like an ongoing problem. And there was another person who spoke at the end of the meeting, and their testimony and their open comments was like, this is just indicative of the bigger problem, the cancer that underlies our industry, that the commissioners are not taking care of. They're putting another band-aid on this tumor, essentially, that is, the formation blowout of the subsurface, that, things are overpressurized and causing inelastic changes to the landscape, to our water quality, our access to safe drinking water, both now and in the future, because anything injected underground could, either come back up or, migrate into underground sources of drinking water. And you heard the staff member at the RRC say, like, our number one job is to protect drinking water. That's why we're here. And this wastewater injection, wastewater disposal, all of the CO2 waste disposal, all of it is truly just a huge threat to our drinking water, which is, to me, super alarming, because we have growing water scarcity, particularly in the West. It's getting hotter, all of the things.
Yeah, wow. And you mentioned at the beginning that you are obviously doing a lot of research into carbon capture, and that led you to these issues with produced water and what to do with all of this produced water. And when we say produced water, we're talking about what exactly, Paige?
Produced water it's mostly salt water. It's super, super salty. A lot of it has, radioactive elements in it. It has VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and other toxics. Sometimes it can be a mix of PFAS, these forever chemicals, which are used as like industrial lubricants and things in drilling. So it's not just very, very salty brine water and, gases like hydrogen sulfide. and it's toxic and radioactive material that can leach out of rocks, so we see like radionuclides and things like that. And then of course you have all of like the air toxics and the BTEX compounds that are produced with oil and gas, right? You've got like benzene, ethylene, toluene, xylene. Like these are the um there's just almost, I'm sorry to keep it simple, there's a lot of air pollution, there's a lot of radioactive material. It's very, very salty brine water. And so when it gets on the land, like as we saw in this most recent breakout, it completely devastated the land, kills all of the vegetation. The Crane County geyser from 2 years ago, there was a video of someone coming back a couple of months later, I think maybe a year later, and everything was still dead. Like it renders the land infertile because it's poison. I mean, it's toxic liquid. It's salty, toxic oil and gas wastewater.
So a long list of things that make up what produced water is. None of it's great, and it has long-lasting effects when it comes back to the surface, which it often does because of subsurface conditions that can force it back out, or like you said, migrate. So thank you for breaking that down. I think that's going to be an ongoing thing that we do want to talk about and spread the word on, because with the mess of wells that are leaking and creating geysers and breaking out in different places, this is all happening against the backdrop of carbon injection and or potential, more carbon injection. Um, and maybe, while we're talking about it, Paige, you can kind of connect the dots for us. What does all this problem with produced water and not having enough options for disposal, how does that connect to carbon injection and what the Railroad Commission wants to oversee?
Yeah, so with carbon waste injection, when you whether it's a class 2 or class 6 well. So class 2 well is the EOR, the enhanced oil recovery, shallow disposal of carbon waste into either a productive or not productive formation. And so, it's going to cause earthquakes, right? Because CO2 is like it wants to expand in the subsurface and it's going to cause more pressure. So you can either like let it cause earthquakes, which is not ideal, or you could produce water out of the formation to manage the pressure in the formation. So with class 6, which are the very deep, very long-term storage, like sequestration wells, the new class of wells that are coming online from EPA, they're definitely going to need to do pressure management in these class 6 wells, meaning that as they inject a lot of carbon dioxide waste underground, they're going to measure the microseismicity of that formation, whether it's showing tremors that if you add more CO2, it's going to rupture, right? So pressure management is when they take water out of that formation to lower the pressure, manage the pressure, and then you have the same produced water predicament, right? Where do we put the produced water? Do we inject it somewhere else? Is it going to cause an earthquake over there, or is just a sinkhole or whatever? And that's the problem they're seeing in Australia with the Gorgon project. It's an LNG terminal with carbon capture, and they're injecting underground, and they keep having to stop injection because of pressure management and nowhere to dispose of this really, really salty brine water that's being produced from the injection well. So this is not a problem that's specific to enhanced oil recovery or specific to fracking or anything like that. It's going to be a problem that we'll continue to see with carbon dioxide injection.
So yeah, thank you for explaining that, and that's definitely something that you'll be hearing more from Commission Shift about too as the months go on, because our oil and gas agency, the Railroad Commission, wants permitting authority over projects like the ones that Paige just described, and that's our first step in sort of raising a red flag here, is that the Railroad Commission does not have the track record or the resources or what we can tell, even the desire to responsibly oversee projects like this that have so many dangerous repercussions, not just for the environment, but for public health. And so we are sharing a petition. We'll link it again on our Twitter. But we're sharing a petition to oppose the Railroad Commission's pursuit of that permitting authority, what's known as primacy over carbon injection. And so this is something that's super important, and we'll keep sort of explaining and reminding folks about as we go on. So back to the open meeting. We had that really great testimony about the waste facility, and we had sort of the disappointing response from the commissioners because they did approve that item. And then, there was a lot of blanket approvals, and that's also really typical and normal for what we've been seeing month in and month out. Is they sort of just line up a whole bunch of agenda items that are all kind of under a similar category, and they will just mass approve a bunch of items. And if you go back in and look at what they approve, it's things like flaring exception requests and pipeline prevention orders, and on and on and on. And even this month, we noticed normally there's roughly 200 to 300 pipeline prevention orders. There were lots more this time, maybe double that. And so that's something else that we try to note and follow up on, like what's going on here? Why were there so many more this time? And we're probably going to invite and figure out a way to share more information about that, or invite somebody who can speak to that, a specialist who might be able to give us some more insight on that kind of agenda item. But basically, prevention orders are violations that companies receive for not for different things with pipelines. Often it's not correctly marking them. So if they don't have accurate GIS coordinates for pipelines, right, that can be dangerous, and they could be getting prevention orders, so some sort of violation. Was hundreds of agenda items. And so, yeah, we definitely will follow up with more information on pipeline safety, and, why we see patterns like this, where we see, jumps from 200 to 500 in a month for that kind of thing. Before we go on to 709, there was also an item we pulled out for discussion, and that was item 36. And this has to do with a landowner who is struggling with a irresponsible or allegedly operator that is in violation of some rules. So item 36 was part of some blanket approvals. They were without question or discussion. But we can kind of pull out and talk about what the item was and what that landowner is facing. Alyssa, if you're able, let me make sure I can invite you to unmute. Maybe, yeah, Alyssa is our field organizer, and could you talk to us, Alyssa, about this particular landowner and some of the things that she's experiencing with this operator, and what the Railroad Commission's role has been?
Howdy, y'all. So yeah, I'm not sure that this particular item number is related to Barbara's cases, but overall, what they tried to do was they are petitioning for a motion for rehearing to have unrestricted renewal of their P5. And so if they do not have an active P5, then they cannot, operate on the current well inventory that they have. And so,
and let us know again, this is the operator wanting to renew their P5. What is a P5?
It is basically like permission to operate, their organization report. So that's what that is. And so they had gotten it, they didn't have an active one because a lot of their wells were out of compliance, and the request was that they bring these wells into compliance and they follow up with other plugging requirements. And so they allegedly brought a lot of these wells into compliance, and that's why they submitted this motion for rehearing back in November. And so what we typically see, right, is this kind of like exchange of, well leases and property. They kind of switch it off. They say that they can't afford to plug it, so they'll hand it off to someone. And so having like an active P5 allows them to do that. And so that's what we've been speculating, right? That they're trying to sell these wells off because they're not functioning. And yeah, it's just kind of like a really big like mess. We've been trying to follow along with this operator specifically, just because they haven't been very good neighbors. And so people, especially in the area that our contact is located in, have just been kind of concerned for their safety. And that's part of the reason why Barbara has been attempting to continue with her complaints, and why they shouldn't have an active P5 report, P5, because they're just not managing their wells properly.
And so, if the Railroad Commission actually enforced or looked into who is applying, who's submitting P5 forms, and did the background check on their practices and if they're in compliance or not, isn't that what should happen to prevent operators from acting out of compliance or being able to continue to act out of compliance?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. The thing is that like I think the last reported, the Railroad Commission only has about 186 inspectors. And so going out to do that legwork of, checking compliance and making sure that, they're checking the boxes is kind of like a massive task, especially for wells that are marginally producing. These operators say that they're producing, and maybe they're not as much, but that kind of gives them space and time, for them to say, oh, we were last in compliance on this date. It's fine. You don't have to come and check on us. So yeah.
And because the Railroad Commission doesn't really have the resources to maybe check on every single well, they don't have enough staff to inspectors to send to all of these places, then you do get situations, I'm imagining, where no one lays eyes on these sites for months, maybe even years at a time.
Right. Yeah, and so it falls on landowners to kind of be monitoring these wells and these operators, and that's a big task, for an everyday person to do, to go out there and just make sure that these folks are following what they're supposed to be doing.
And it may not be something they realize is going to fall on them when they either buy property or go into an agreement with how that property is going to be used.
Right. Exactly.
Well, thank you for explaining that and sort of highlighting a case like this, because I imagine that there's more than just this one landowner having a problem, and sometimes it is probably landowners that may not even know to be looking for issues like this, and might have bigger things going on than they realize with operators and compliance. So. Yeah, we don't have a ton of time, but I want to turn to the methane rule. This was agenda item 709, and I really want to sort of talk about what happened today with the Railroad Commission mounting a challenge to that methane rule and who spoke in favor of it. So maybe we can kind of discuss that a bit. Paige, I know as policy manager, you've got some insight here. Can you tell us a little bit about like what's in the federal methane rule and why, if we can, why the Railroad Commission would be challenging this rule?
Yeah. So the methane rule is just like trying to reduce methane emissions. We know that methane is a super potent greenhouse gas, and we know that West Texas is like one of the biggest hotbeds for rogue methane emissions in, let's say, the world, like definitely in the United States, but probably the world. And so the methane rule is like just guidelines from the government to say how we're going to reduce our methane emissions, right? Like venting and flaring and waste, basically. And what I really appreciated about the comments today was that they really spoke to just all of the like multi-co benefits of the methane rule. We're going to save operators money. That was the first one. They're like, we're going to be reducing waste. We're not going to be flaring, venting. It's going to reinforce our energy security because we're going to have more resources on hand that we're not, venting into the atmosphere. It's going to create more jobs in methane mitigation. It's going to reduce other air pollutants like VOCs and toxics and all of that. So it's just like it's a win for our industry. It's a win for our climate and environment. It's a win for energy security, jobs, and basically everyone in Texas. And so our allies at Public Citizen and Environmental Defense Fund and Environment Texas went up and were like, hey, Railroad Commission, like, it's pretty disappointing that you're trying to sue the federal government for these very smart, very good program that they're putting out for everybody. Like, and one of them, I think it was Luke at Environment Texas, is like, if you're not going to do what is essentially your job to mitigate methane emissions, like, get out of the way and let the feds do it, but it's federal money to help us meet our climate goals, reinforce the industry, create new jobs, improve public health, and our commissioners are actively fighting it. So the question is like, what's their goal? Like, why? Why are they trying to like blow this up? Because they didn't come up with it themselves. They just hate the EPA and the federal government so much that they have to blow up anything that comes through. Like it just feels really spiteful.
Yeah, and to your point, it puts them out of step with even industry. I think it was also potentially maybe Luke who mentioned this, but Oxy and Exxon are supportive of methane regulation and methane oversight to cut emissions. So it seems that they are, not really reflecting the will of anybody here when they mount a case to the government to try to block this rule.
Well, and
But
it's going to
yeah.
cost more taxpayer dollars to like lawyer up and fight this. Like, why are we wasting our money on this when even industry wants to move in this direction? Exactly to your point. Like, carbon pricing and carbon management is the wave of industry for the future. And so, they need to get on board with this, or at least stop wasting our taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, so we did have those comments by different advocates, as you mentioned, and then quickly that item was then approved by commissioners. So that is going to, at this point, move forward as they, try to challenge the rule, and we will continue defending it. I know that our executive director prepared comments that we'll share out in defense of the rule, and it will be an ongoing battle, unfortunately. So in the public input section, I want to highlight that West Texas rancher Skylar White appeared before the Railroad Commission again. He is pretty much a regular monthly presence, and he is he has over 100 legacy wells on his property that are many of them that are actively leaking. And this time he, brought up a photo of one of those and talked about band-aids. And I think this is an apt term. He's talking about band-aid plugs, and that they are not all the way. They're not thorough plugging jobs. They are coming unplugged after they're supposed to be resolved. They're not, which I can only imagine how frustrating that is. Um, and he especially called out the commissioners and the chairman for not answering his questions. He goes there to make public comment. He asks questions about why his wells aren't being seen, or why his wells are not being plugged to a correct standard. And they do not speak with him now. They do not answer his questions. And so he was met with silence yet again, which was, I think, also disgraceful that he traveled all the way and is facing a real problem and is not getting the support from the Railroad Commission that he deserves or needs. So I definitely want to highlight Skylar's work in continuing to call out this issue. He's called it at other times a black eye on the state. We also had testimony from Virginia Palacios, our executive director. And I just want to point out that her testimony, she called out the commissioners earlier in the meeting for approving the permit for that waste disposal facility near the summer camp. And said you could do more than just asking if maybe the operator would consider moving a little bit further away from a residential facility. She's called them out and said it was disappointing that it is within their power to actually require them to move, and they didn't do that. And then she gave comment on monitoring and enforcement goals that she would like to see the Railroad Commission improve. And those fall under the categories of transparency, enforcement, and public engagement. And so we'll release the full comments that Virginia made. But this has to do with the feedback that we've heard from Texans across the state about how the Railroad Commission is interfacing with them when they have problems. And Alyssa, I'm going to ask you to speak again. We're kind of doing a tag team with Paige and Alyssa here. But Alyssa, you've worked with Texans last year during the monitoring and enforcement plan that the Railroad Commission released. They do this every year. So you've heard feedback from that, like how that plan actually operates in real life when people have problems. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what is the monitoring and enforcement plan, and what are you hearing from folks that are impacted by oil and gas pollution?
Hey, so yeah, this will be my second year working on the monitoring and enforcement plan, and basically it is a document drafted, requested for comment, and then published by the Railroad Commission, Oil and Gas Division. Basically, the Railroad Commission just says these are our monitoring activities. This is how we plan to roll it out. These are the major violations we've seen, and that's pretty much it. I think it's been kind of a superficial kind of thing, like just checking the legislative requirement box to get this published. And so a lot of the comments that we see really centers around safety and enforcement activities. One commenter had mentioned about how, they had to live near oil and gas operations, and for such a long time, they had like cancer sores, and they had to keep getting that out, so much to the point where they like moved out. Like, you have these requirements for flaring and venting, and yet there's no real enforcement. There's no there are no, there's like, you could probably get an operator to pay a fine, allege that they're bringing their site to compliance, excuse me, and then continue, doing the same thing over and over again. So yeah, it is, there, that was just one comment. And so we've received others from other folks about, that there's just not a lot of oversight. There's not a lot of improvement, and it's for folks to keep having to take it upon themselves to, submit complaints and try to get some um, relief from the railroad.
So I don't know if anyone else had some issues with the sound breaking up, but I've got some issues with the sound breaking up. I don't know if you can hear me, but it sounds like some of the points you're making are similar to the landowner that you've been working with the rogue operators, you could say, where there's a lack of enforcement and a lack of resources to enforce to a reasonable standard. So that seems like a reoccurring theme I'm hearing. And so with monitoring and enforcement, what are you looking forward to this year? What's coming up that you want to see, maybe in line with Virginia's comments or not, but like what's going to happen in the spring 2024 and how do you think what are the things you're going to be looking for, I guess, in the next monitoring and enforcement plan?
I think, yeah, very like in line with Virginia's comments. I want to see, I want to see the plan and like an actual like a plan that can be actually implemented on complaints and investigations. I brought it up a little bit earlier that the Railroad Commission only has 186 field inspectors, and so that compared to the volume of wells in Texas, like it's not like it's not
The math isn't mathing.
Yeah, the math isn't mathing. And so I definitely want to see like improvement there, like real tangible, attainable ways that the Railroad Commission plans on following up with complaints, making sure that there is a clear plan of action for when someone like Barbara submits a complaint against an operator that should not be operating or does not have the means to continue operating, how that person who started the complaint, how they're getting the follow-up. And it shouldn't have to be like every week making a phone call on, the landowners and to see what's going on. Like it should just be, it should be readily available. So yeah, I want to see like that kind of built out in the plan. We also really want to see like the Railroad Commission answer to the question of barred operators. Like we caught it that so many operators that don't have P5s or should not be operating are operating or do still have wells under their name. Like we want to see that really addressed and again, like tangible, like we can see how this is changing within the monitoring and enforcement plan when it comes to taking care of non-compliant operators. And then finally, like one thing that was mentioned in last year's plan and we haven't heard too much about was the deploying the Office of Public Engagement. And it would be nice, like if we could cut some of our tasks in like educating folks about what the Railroad Commission is, what they do, and have like the state agency take that up, take that upon themselves to handle that and to go out and talk to the public about who they are, what they do, and when they vote, what they're voting for. Because I mean, the Railroad Commission's name is still very, very vague. Like I still talk to people and, oh yeah, trying to you fix the railroad commission. They're like, oh yeah, railroads. And I'm like, oh no, not that. um, it would be nice if the state agency can take that upon themselves to really get out there, especially in the districts that have really heavy oil and gas build out. One thing that had been mentioned to me by a landowner last year was like, people are just used to seeing oil and gas wells, whether they're working or not. They're used to the smells, they're used to the sights. And it's like, okay, but you don't have to be, like that shouldn't be the like that shouldn't be the norm. And so how do we fix that? How do we answer that concern? And it's definitely a matter of public education and public outreach.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. So yeah, we had a packed meeting. We had waste pit disposal facilities. We had the methane rule. We had BARD operators. We have monitoring and enforcement, public engagement. The list goes on. But I'm really looking forward to digging into all these things again. We come back every month with a live discussion that follows the open meeting. The next open meeting is February 14th. And we definitely want people to tune in for that one. It's right around Winter Storm Uri anniversary, which is a significant anniversary in our state. So we'll be talking about that and what that means then and now, 3 years out from that. And we do encourage folks to, leave us questions on our Twitter page, follow us on social media at Commission Shift, and our website, commissionshift.org. And sign up for our newsletter if you don't already. That's a great way to stay up to date on our work and help us hold the Railroad Commission accountable, take action, and get these things that we deserve. A more transparent agency that is proactive and is responsible, that puts the land and people of Texas first. So thank you everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, Paige and Alyssa, for being our resident experts. And we'll talk to you February 14th. Thanks, everyone.